Good morning, Mr. Mikhnev.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today in the studio.
Nice to be here. I think we have a right momentum here now when the government is really declaring the intention to deepen reform. And this is the moment where international finance organizations such as World Bank can support the reform agenda. We are very satisfied with our partnership with Kazakhstan, but we believe we definitely can do more.
Welcome back to the Astana Times YouTube channel. I'm your host Asel Stubaldna, and I'm pleased to be joined today by World Bank Country Manager for Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, Mr. Andrei Mikhnev. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And first of all, congratulations on the first year since you assumed your role as a country manager for Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. Could you share with us, first of all, how was the year for you and for the World Bank?
Yes, it's already more than a year past. I joined my work here on February 1st last year. Interesting fact is that some people were saying, oh, you're moving to Astana. It will be probably very cold after you've been working across the globe for the last 20 years. But the matter of fact is that my last work was in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. So I actually moved from the coldest capital to the second coldest capital, depending on statistics, of course. But on the substance, I think it was very, very active year for us, for the World Bank in Kazakhstan, and with our partners here. It's really through this year we were able to achieve quite a few things. I think we sharpened much more what the priorities could be, and also from our counterparts, both in the government, the private sector, and civil society, I think there's much better dialogue happening and understanding how the World Bank can support the Kazakhstan thrive for growing, for becoming a high income country in the future. Through this year, we had a lot of analytical work delivered to Kazakhstan, but also we've been talking about financing needs. And I think that's also, again, priorities for financing were identified during this year. You know, perhaps, that Kazakhstan, as an independent country, joined the World Bank Group. So that was a really important moment for the young country to ensure that country has an access to a global knowledge and also to development financing. Since that time, we provided more than $8 billion to support Kazakhstan in its economic growth. And we implemented over 50 projects. Currently, we have 7 active projects here. I should say it's a project of Kazakhstan that the World Bank is financing. It's not our project, right? So that's a big difference, because sometimes people may refer it to World Bank project. It's actually the project initiative reform of Kazakhstan as a country, where we provide financial support and also expertise support. And so currently we have 7 projects, which amounts about $3.5 billion. The areas that we supported over the years include human development, education, health, macroeconomic stabilization, private sector development, connectivity, agriculture development. And current portfolio is focusing on what we believe is the most needed for economy of Kazakhstan, including the key sectors beyond just the oil sector, also on the human capital, including some projects we have in education modernization. Digital development is very important. That's why last month in February, the board of directors approved a new project for Kazakhstan, financing the last mile connectivity for areas where otherwise internet would not be available to household, and also to some schools and residential buildings. So that's a very important project. In fact, this project has been preparing for quite a while. And the reason why it was approved, it's really showing that regardless of the changes of the government or personalities, the priorities of Kazakhstan to become a knowledge-based economy, fully empowered by the digital connectivity, is really also the commitment to this project. So we're very glad that this project has been recently approved. I want also to say that we have a quite ambitious pipeline of project financing in Kazakhstan. We are talking to different ministries, Ministry of Higher Education and Science, Ministry of Labor and Social Policies, Protection, Ministry of Transport, practically all the ministries where they have ambitious reform program. I think we have a right momentum here now when the government is really declaring the intention to deepen reform. And this is the moment where international finance organizations such as World Bank can support the reform agenda. So it cannot be done separately and say, okay, we have a big reform agenda, but we need to do it ourselves. In fact, it's always good when you rely on something that has already been done in other countries. So you can benefit from experience, lessons learned, and positive examples. And this is exactly where the World Bank is coming. Plus, it's added up with the quite good financial resources available. In fact, Kazakhstan did a great job in ensuring and managing their debt over the time, and really have a much more fiscal space to using the borrowed money for financing their development priorities. I should say that the World Bank Group is not only International Bank for Reconstruction and Development that many people may refer to. In fact, the World Bank Group has a 5 organization: International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, International Development Association, International Finance Corporation, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, right? So Kazakhstan, as an upper middle income country, has access to so-called IBRD resources, which is International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, because IDA resources, International Development Association, is mostly an instrument which is available to low income and low middle income country, right? But in addition to the IBRD, which provide direct financing to governments, we have very active presence here, and over the 30 years of our other members of our group, like International Finance Corporation. They're also very much actively supporting directly the private sector. So for IFC, International Finance Corporation, they deal with the private investment, not only providing financing, but bringing a lot of other investors behind them. IFC is a AAA organization, is really kind of able to attract a lot of resources. And this is where the country could benefit from, right? Like Kazakhstan, for instance. So it's not only IFC money coming here, but a lot of other investors will trust much more specific transaction is IFC is participating in that. So that's a good example how we kind of leverage different instruments, with IBRD providing sovereign financing to the government, IFC dealing directly with the private sector, enhancing the work that we've been doing. But also we have a MIGA, which most recently helped guarantee some very attractive financing for the Kazakh railway. And that transaction was very good demonstration of how the foreign banks, commercial banks, could trust the partners here in Kazakhstan, especially if it's supported by such organizations like MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. In fact, I would say that for 30 years, in general, we're very satisfied with our partnership with Kazakhstan, but we believe we definitely can do more. The government to formulate their policies. Most recent example would be like our country climate and development report, which actually look together at what we see as a climate agenda and the development agenda, and how country can benefit to consider their policies together on that. In fact, this report already informed quite a few actions on the government side. I think we're all aware that there was a low carbon strategy adopted in Kazakhstan, and we're working closely to ensure there's a roadmap to implement that. That's a very, very important thing, especially for Kazakhstan, which is very much dominant on the oil, right? And transiting to the more decarbonized economy, to more economy which is sustained over time on the greener principles, that's really important. So this report is really the right way to do that.
Mm-hmm. And now I would like to focus more on the economic side and economic reforms in Kazakhstan. I've read the latest economic update of the World Bank for Kazakhstan, and for me it looked quite optimistic. Could you share some insights and notable trends in the economic development of the country? And also, how would you assess the ongoing economic reforms in Kazakhstan?
Sure, happy to do it. Yeah, it's great that you mention our recent work. In fact, such economic update we are trying to produce every 6 months. So it's really fresh information. It's not based on the results of a long time ago. However, we're trying to bring the trends and analyze it also from a historical perspective. In this report, some media here already kind of picked up the lost decade notion of that, but not unfolding it, right? So when talking about lost decade, we are talking about lost decade in productivity growth. We had a GDP growth for last years, but productivity is really stagnated. And that was the issue here. But it's not mostly to say, okay, it's a loss completely. It's to help us understand where to focus on, right? And that report is really showing that the productivity is the key things to focus. I think what's even bigger thing for this report is that in many middle-income countries, the history shows that the country grew up very fast, right? And the Kazakhstan did it in the 2000s. But then this growth stopped or stagnated. It was not only the pace of the growth was not increasing, right? 3-5% more or less going all over, but not really the next jump. And that's what we call the middle income trap. So many countries actually trapped in that. And using the same model as they used before to grow to the high income countries didn't help them, right? And it went for years. So we want to be sure, and our report is particularly showing that the Kazakhstan is not really kind of trapped in this situation. What we need to do for that, right? So the model is, as again, the growth model was very much driven by the commodities, all right? Mostly oil that Kazakhstan exported. So when you look at the composition of the drivers of growth, you can see like natural capital as a part of that, which drives the economy growth, and that's the bigger part for Kazakhstan. Then you have a built capital, produced capital, which includes like infrastructure and everything that produced. And then the third component of the economic growth will be human capital, right? And then when you compare to different countries, you can see that drivers of growth in Kazakhstan has been mostly driven by the natural capital, right? Natural resource endowment. While other countries in OECD, where Kazakhstan is planning to become soon, is really much more dependent on the growth in human capital, right? And also on the built capital. So I think this is a kind of conceptual thing, how the whole growth model needs to be rethought here in Kazakhstan, how to ensure that it's really more related to the human capital development, to ensure that infrastructure is on par with other countries. Right? Another point that in the report we're mentioning is that you need to understand that growth model is also important when you have an effective and efficient governance. So the machinery institutions which support the economic growth And that's a critical part here, how to ensure that all setting of institutions, both public and private, really focusing on the development. One of the issues that the report is also pointing out is that the economy is still very much dominated by state-owned enterprise here, right? While at some point of time it's really been right intention to ensure that there are some market failures addressed through the government intervention, through the state intervention. I think we reached a level when it should be much more competition for private operators with less role for the government. The government role should remain facilitating, providing enabling environment, but it's mostly for the private sector to compete and to provide the services there. Related examples that I have to this report is our recent analysis of the national financial holding by TITR, which also showing that could improve, whatever it's become really development, financial development institution going further rather than having more substitution in some part to what the financial markets can do here. And the last aspect from the report that I wanted to mention is also related to diversification of the economy, because the report is looking at what happened in the past, but also try to see what could be done going further. And that's the value of this report. So it's really kind of helping you. It provides the real thinking of what needs to be done. And of course, the report could not get rid of the issues of diversification. Right? So diversified economy is really what Kazakhstan would need. The important point here, though, is that diversification doesn't mean diversification from oil, right? Diversification means ensuring that you have diversified assets in the economy, which could be used much more productively, regardless of the real kind of downturn in specific assets, like you have oil, for instance, right? If the price is going down, it immediately affects the economy. So the diversified assets means that you also have developed human capital, developed entrepreneurship. So enterprises could really move around and get their financial assets to the sectors where it's really been more productive. And that requires also human capital. So human capital is those skills that could be then also be demanded by the private sector. So that's also important consideration to ensure how we diversify economy.
And all the important areas that you have mentioned right now is what the reforms are actually trying to address: the diversification, the human capital development, and also the reduction of the state's role in the economy. I know that it's a challenging work and a lot of work ahead, but still I think it's a matter of time. And what are your thoughts on these economic reforms in Kazakhstan?
We have a very positive signal which has been heard from the authorities of Kazakhstan. I think in many addresses from the president, the addresses from the members of the government, we really see that the government is serious about reform. So I think all the declaration that has been made, all the intentions that has been spoken out, is really showing that there is no debate of where the country should go. I think the key challenge is to implement all this declaration. This is really the hard part.
As
right?
always, right?
Yeah, it's all. But well, in some countries there is still debate, like what should be done, how it should be done. It's really what's the model to select. But it's really in Kazakhstan, I think the challenge is now to implement, right? And I think we have already within the country, but also with the international community, we have clear understanding what could be done, right? And clearly now is to implement it. I wanted also to mention another challenge that for this implementation of reform is that really that Kazakhstan is not operating on its own. Kazakhstan is a part of the global economy on the region where it's located, but also a broader link to the global economy. So when we are planning and forecasting the potential success of reforms, we need to be sure that we are taking into consideration elements outside external factor for Kazakhstan. So let me probably stop on a couple of them, if you don't mind. One, of course, it's if we look at the structure of export, as far as I remember, like 70% of export revenues are coming from oil, right, or from other kind, like really natural resource commodity. So that's really alerting. So if external factors change and the prices or demand would go down, and demand will go down over the time, that really would negatively affect the potential growth. And in relation to that, this our report is also giving not that optimistic projection of growth this year, because we understand that growth of new oil production will not, it's not planning for this year, right? And because it's stable, so everything, growth will be composed from other factors, which not that great of contribution yet in the growth. So that's why the growth is slightly above 3% that we see for this year. But from other side, we see that the government intention to double GDP by 2030. So that means at least 6% growth annually needs to be done. So that's the big challenge. So really much more focus needs to be done how to ensure that dependence on growth on oil is not undermining the overall growth. So there would be other elements of growth. To support that is a challenge, our report is also saying that the complexity of the products produced by in Kazakhstan is actually going down. So it's less sophisticated value-added goods that the government is producing, right? And then if it's low-value goods, then it's less competitive in outside market. So complexity of the output is really important things to consider, right? When we're looking at the external market. The next things, of course, is that Russia invasion of Ukraine actually undermined the global movements of goods and services. The established economic links that exist, especially between Europe and Asia, particularly East Asia and South Asia, right? In this regard, there is a challenge and opportunity for Kazakhstan. So from one side, Kazakhstan could actually use their location as a transit for goods going between West and East, right? And our report on the Middle Corridor, particularly picking up the ability of tripling the volume of freight, and also making it half the time needed for that. I can get a little bit more on this later. But that's an important factor, right? So you cannot anymore rely on other partners, as I said, because of Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you need to find out how to continue the economic links when we still have a war against Ukraine, and so far the Ukraine and Russia cannot be used for any trade-related activities, right? So that's also important consideration for the external factors. And then the last point is that we've all seen just recently how global pandemic of COVID-19 affected the economy globally. There is no certainty, or there is no like really absolute certainty to prevent such pandemic happening anytime soon in the future, right? So how the resilient Kazakhstan economy in facing such potential things in the future? I think we learned a lot during this pandemic. Businesses adapted, people adapted to that, right? But something else could happen. It could not be necessarily just a pandemic from the point of health. It could be technogenic catastrophe. It could be some other activities which maybe again the actions of nature or action of people, right? So all these external factors saying, look, we need to be sure, we need to be prepared, we need to ensure that the economy is resilient and ready to face such challenges, external challenges.
And in terms of private sector development, which you also mentioned, could you share with us how specifically does the World Bank support Kazakhstan in this effort?
Sure. As I said, we're using all the instruments that we have in the World Bank Group, including our financing of the government reforms for the private sector, but also IFC, International Finance Corporation, directly working with the private sector companies here. I think the priorities we have here communicated to the government, and actually the government also communicated to us, is that the need for liberalization of economy is really important. We can see that the structure of economy is still very much dominated by the state-owned enterprises, right? And if at some point of time, as I said, it was a measure which may be explained by the market failure and in certain areas where the private sector could not pick up. I think the current level of development, we need to rethink how to ensure that the private sector is playing much more role and the government is playing less direct role in the economy. So that's the key things. In this regard, I think the SOE reform comes up as a big priority, right? For that, I think it's very important to set the strategies right. First is to ensure what's really objectives of the government to still be present in the sectors, in the markets where the private sector could operate. And then on agreed this objective and principles, we need to look at all existing assets that's still managed by the state and to see are they really needs to be continuing or needs to be privatized or needs to be also giving to the private sector on different terms, right? Privatization is one only method, but it's also include concession, corporatization of enterprises. So it's really important to start from the strategic objective adopted and go down to ensure that it's much more businesses are operating as a private sector. Second, of course, is that Kazakhstan did a great job already, but it's just to ensure that you have a fair playing level field, right? So you cannot have government enterprises having some preferential treatment, right? It's not only what is in the law, but it also could be like perceived. If I'm as a ministry which is formulating policies, and then I have an enterprise which I 100% own, right? So by definition, I would be sure that what I owned is operating efficiently and effectively. But one of the reasons it could be, as I said, perceived conflict of interest to see what is done. So in many countries, the ownership and management of state assets were moved out from the ministries, right? Separated. So ministries are focusing on formulating policies, right? To set the policies, while there is a management of assets which are still in the government ownership, which is separate from that, right? I think in some sectors it's already we see happening, right? Because we see that in some sectors which are very much regulated, you cannot regulate and at the same time own some of the market participants because you can regulate in favor of your enterprise. So that's the thing, and the steps has been taken, but more needs to be done to ensure it's a fully independent boards and corporate governance of the state-owned enterprises also is also ensured. But it's also related to some other issues, right? When we're talking about private sector development. So many enterprises are used by state enterprises, I think, right? Used to ensure that some tasks are done, it's much better salaries of those who are working in the state enterprises rather than in some ministries, right? So that's also the needs to be fixed to ensure that it's really working. Another thing that we're also doing, and we're doing it from our project, is how we ensure that the private sector has actually an incentive to invest more and to create more jobs. Right? There is a very good example I had from my colleague in Georgia. Before reforms happened there, we all know that there was a big reforms happened like almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago in Georgia. And they did some kind of survey, and most young people answered that when they finish their universities, they would like to work in police, because that's where the most income they see coming from, right? So it's really to showing up how it was kind of completely reversed the incentives. But after reforms, most of the young people saying, well, we would like to open our business, right? We can would like to try many things, because there was a hope for economic freedom, and the people started to enjoying that. I think we need to be sure that in Kazakhstan, especially young people, are becoming more innovative, becoming more entrepreneurial, but also any people, right? So it would be easier to start business. If you work, let's say, for someone, but you have your own ideas, it should be easier to start doing this, right? And I think we work also through our projects with them, creating this innovative solution, helping to create incubators for the business, so it's really grown business could be, right? It's if you look at the share of SMEs in Kazakhstan and other countries, you can clearly see there's a lot of potential for Kazakhstan to step up in this direction and to ensuring that the growth, productivity, and jobs are mostly driven by the private sector.
How would you evaluate the measures undertaken by Kazakhstan to combat and curb these inflationary pressures and overall combating the inflation?
It's a very good question. And it's actually, I'm glad that the trend with inflation was reversed. So we're very glad that Kazakhstan was able to cutting in half the inflation comparing, as you said, to December 2022. I think a lot of efforts have been done for the last year, for 2023. First of all, the causes of inflation is down a little bit, right? What drove inflation 2022 is, again, the import cost was higher because of food prices. There was an increase in the minimum wage here in Kazakhstan, and also fluctuated prices for some commodities that Kazakhstan are exporting. So I think the first factor is really easing of external factors which contribute to inflation, and particularly food prices reduced significantly. The second factor is, I think, the government and the central bank followed strictly the fiscal tightening, right, to ensure that the policies are really focusing on curbing the inflation, right? And we can see in the action of the central bank for the 2023 how they manage the policy rate and use this instrument to ensure inflation was quite good. We also saw that the market sentiments eased a little bit, so inflation expectation is not that high as we had in 2022, and it's also drove inflation up, because expectation is very important, how market has really behaved in that. So the prospects for this year is really better than we had before, although our forecast is not that optimistic as the government, so we still believe that the inflation will be around 8% by the end of this year. But going further, I think it will be gradually easing going further in the next year in 2025.
Moving on to the region of Central Asia, where Kazakhstan plays a very important role, could you share what are some of the challenges, economic challenges facing the region, and how well the countries of Central Asia addressing them at the moment?
Good. Yeah, I think Kazakhstan is indeed really important player. It's the largest economy in the Central Asia. It's most developed in terms of GDP per capita. And there are some common challenges in the region which could not be resolved by their own countries, right? I think one of the biggest issue that is affecting all the countries in Central Asia is the water, scarcity of water. A lot of analysis has been done recently, including satellite images, showing that this particular region losing water big time. Actually, it's quite disturbing, even in comparison to other regions of the world. So these are efforts which needs to be done urgently, and they could be done only together by countries of the Central Asia. In this regard, I think it's a great opportunity for Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan just assumed chairmanship in the International Fund for RLC. And this is really the organization that we believe could look at the water issues in the region. It could be some kind of an existing institutional mechanism that can help countries to agree on the water issues. I think it's not something that could not be done. It's really, we have countries which are kind of more water resources like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. We have countries mostly like on the downstream, Kazakhstan, including Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, right? So there might be different interests, but in fact, it's the interest of all countries to agree and use these opportunities for them to ensuring that the water resources is used much more effectively and efficiently. The World Bank actually had a very good project in the past. I've heard a lot about the North RLC, which level was stabilized. It was the government again project. We were honored to finance this project and provide expertise support. And it's for years has been sustained now, right? So we are planning now the follow-up project also. So it's a good example. In other countries in the region, in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, the World Bank is also financing projects that could contribute to more efficient use of scarce water resources. So water is a really big issue for the region. The second, I would say, is energy market, right? If you look at the region, it's only Turkmenistan, which is like a consistently net exporter of electricity. All other countries are actually net importers of electricity. And if you look at if it's only bilateral agreement between countries, sometimes it's create a shortfall of power, as we know also in Kazakhstan. And I think the last winter was a real situation which urgently the country needs to buy electricity from abroad. So international cooperation in this regard is also important. So countries could benefit from each other, countries of Central Asia. So if in some regions you may have excess of electricity, it could be utilized across the border, right? Not lost, but utilized across the border, and that's the important thing. And also the countries could utilize more renewable energy, because then it's kind of additional risk mitigation measure for them to ensure that they have availability of electricity. So that's the electricity, is the electrical power market is the second Central Asia issues, really. And the third one probably regarding to the benefiting from trade routes, right? When talking about Trans-Caspian, even transit corridor, yes, indeed, it will help to move the goods from west to east. But we also need to work, and it's actually benefiting even more probably the countries of Central Asia. How the existing railway system, digital connectivity system really help them to trade between each other, right? Or delivering goods from west and east across the territories of each other. Like for instance, Uzbekistan is like double landlocked country, right? So it's really interesting situation. So for that country, is ensuring that they have good connectivity is essential for the economy, right? The same for Kazakhstan. Also, it's a landlocked country. We have a Caspian Sea, but it's still a big lake, right? So that's important. So how to ensure that the transport connectivity working okay? And then, so that's also the issue which is related to the Central Asia as a whole. And probably the last issue is that all 5 countries of Central Asia can learn from each other more in terms of reforms. Kazakhstan was always seen as a really leader of reform for many years. But we now see that Uzbekistan, actually, the pace of reform is really impressive, what they're trying to do. Of course, it was much lower kind of starting point, but really many countries, not only in Central Asia, but in some other countries, looking at Uzbekistan, what's really they can do, how they can do it, what we can learn from that. So let's ensure that we're learning from each other in the countries of Central Asia is critically important. So we don't repeat something that has already been tested and proven to be either wrong or right by other countries. So that's also the last probably point for Central Asia priorities.
And this is what the leaders of Central Asian countries always mention at their consultative meetings, that we shouldn't compete, we should cooperate, we should promote regional cooperation. And I think that's a very important moment. And now that you mentioned the connectivity area, which has been under increased attention in the past few years, given all the geopolitical developments, and the role of the Trans-Caspian route, also known as the Middle Corridor, is very important. And I know that the World Bank last year released a big study on looking into the challenges and opportunities presented by this corridor. And one of the points, one of the steps suggested by World Bank in unlocking this potential was reimagine it as an economic corridor. Could you elaborate on that point and also share what are some of the challenges facing the countries at the moment?
Absolutely. And let me start from one point which is very much related to unfolding this. I think when talking about competition between the countries, it's part of cooperation, right? It's not the opposite. In order to cooperate, you need to compete, because if you can do something better, the other countries could also try to do it better, right? If competition is fully diminished, then what's a cooperation? Cooperation of something bad is not what we intend to do. We want to cooperate on something which is really good, right? If, you have your neighbor who is really introducing the smart home system in your apartment, you're saying, well, why I cannot do this? Right? This is cooperation because you are actually learning from that. Or if there are some reforms done in other countries which are actually benefiting certain vulnerable groups of population or created more jobs, right? It's not a competition in the sense that, oh, I need to do something to diminish this, right? I rather do myself something which I can do even better. So I strongly believe that competition is a driving force of the cooperation. Then coming back to the Middle Corridor, which is also about that, is really our report is showing this as economic corridor, mostly because to highlight that it's not only about infrastructure, right? You need to look at it from the economic perspective, from the perspective of the operators which are dealing with that, to ensure that it seems not as a part of different countries' roads or railways, but rather as a whole comprehensive ecosystem when the goods could be entered at any point of this corridor and smoothly going until the final end of their final destination. If you look at the report, you're showing that at the entry point you have quite a big volume of goods coming, but when it's kind of going all the way through probably Turkey before it's going to the border of Bulgaria and European Union, it's really so tiny, so most goods are not intended to go there. So there are a few explanations, of course, to that, right? Because some goods are needed here. But another explanation is much more costly to go through different barriers. Like you need to have separate declarations, you need to have different brokers to do it, you're having different operators, like you have country operators of railway here, then you have, let's say, in Azerbaijan, you have in Georgia, so how to make it smooth? So one of the principles of the economic corridor is really make it as one thing regardless of the borders of that, right? So that's one thing that we see as economic corridor. Then the second thing is we see this really as multimodal corridor. So it's not only one mean of transportation, but it includes railway. It of course includes sea, right? By the way, we started a study focusing on the depth of the sea, so we can see really what expect us in the future, because that's what inform us what we need to invest. Should we invest in port in this location, or probably in 10 years it would not be a port anymore, right? Either way, it could be like water is going up, which is less probable, or going down, which is probably more probable. So what needs to be done to fix it, right? So you have sea, you have ports, you have railway, you have logistics over the way. So it's not only about moving goods, but you need to sort them out on the way. So it should be transportation hub, warehouses, logistics hub, and services around that, right? To ensure that it's really seen as a one corridor. So that's why we're saying it's economic corridor, because it includes many, many elements and going well beyond just an infrastructure, which of course is needed, and a huge investment is needed, especially in Kazakhstan, for related infrastructure. And I just wanted to mention to your audience, it would be interesting, it's not related to the middle corridor, but for some infrastructure like water and energy, we did with the respective ministry some analysis of existing assets, and especially in the generation, electricity generation, a lot of investments needed to modernize the old equipment, old power plant, which already beyond their life cycle. So it's really huge investments needed here. So our report on middle corridor also showing up that in addition to these big investments in many sectors, but in transport particularly, you need to be policies done also across the countries, which will enable us to make it an economic corridor. In fact, through this report, we're also initiating this dialogue. We had a very good dialogue here in Astana when we invited also the big transport companies. And in February, we also had a similar dialogue in Georgia, where we're looking at the countries in that region, but also with the participation of Kazakhstan, how to ensure that this happening together and how the agreement between countries could make it really economic corridor, and therefore unleash its potential to triple the volume of cargo and also half time for the delivering from eastern border of Kazakhstan to the border of the European Union.
And besides technical expertise that the World Bank is providing, including through these reports, are there any projects related to connectivity that the World Bank is financing or supporting?
Yes, we have currently 2 projects which have been implementing for quite a while, but it's a very successful project, which are focusing mostly on the building the main motorways in Kazakhstan. I think the World Bank was proud partner for many years, and we used a lot of good approaches to ensure that it's less money used by the government and therefore by your taxpayers for building more and quality roads, including some quite complex solution on the southern part where you have some mountains, and so to ensure that the roads is going there. We're currently discussing a couple of projects also that we hope to be finalize the design of this project this year, which will provide additional financing also to railways development and also for the roads development. So there is a pipeline of the project exists, and this sector requires a lot of investment. And as someone is saying, it's the smart person will use somebody's money to finance their needs, right? So we hope that we really can pool resources which are in Kazakhstan, but also from the World Bank, to ensure that the immediate investment needs are fully financed.
In another important project that the World Bank has been working on, just recently released, is the Listening to Kazakhstan survey. And based on the findings of this survey, it says that nearly 70% of Kazakhstan citizens express satisfaction with their life. Could you share with us some notable insights from this survey?
Sure. First of all, this survey is not a one-time event. We were trying to do it all regularly for the last couple of years. I want to mention that this survey also benefited from the contribution of the British government, so we are very proud to partner with them. In fact, yes, 70% of the respondents in general satisfied with life, and it's a very, very good sign, right? Because it's really showing up consistency of the respondents from different parts of Kazakhstan. I think it was like more than 1,400 respondents, which were asked over the period of time. So that's a good sign. I also wanted to mention that trust in the government reform has also increased and currently stand on 67%, right? So it's really very important things, how to ensure that the government policies are supported by the population. We recently also in Astana presented this funding and also make them available now on our website. One of the things which is really still needs to be focused on is that majority of respondents still believe that they're afraid of losing their jobs. I think, just to be sure that I'm correctly saying that, over 50% saying that they're really worried about job loss. So that's very kind of alerting things. And also more than 90%, a vast majority, is concerned about income inequality. So how the wealth is distributed, to what extent they have a fair distribution on wealth. Among the key issues that respondents see is a risk to the economy, I think most of them still concerned about inflation. 94% rated that inflation for them is the largest concern that they see in economic development. So it's also helping the government, I assume, right, to listen to people of Kazakhstan and to see what they can do and how prioritize their priorities. We will continue this survey. And as I said, it's fully disclosed and information is available. So I really welcome everyone to monitor this through our dashboard, which is available online.
And that's a wrap on my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Mikhnev, for this insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting. I think we touched only on a few issues. There are much more work that we are doing. So I invite all your audience to look at our website also, where we put all our information, all our reports, and really we hope that the work that the World Bank is doing here is really contributing to the prosperity of Kazakhstan and to more equitable and sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you.